As we grow up and learn about the world, it's pretty normal to build up notions of what certain things are even if we personally haven't experienced them. This goes for a lot of things, be it places, certain types of food, certain jobs, and more often than not, art. The reason for this is pretty obvious. We only have a limited amount of time on this earth, so there's naturally a lot of stuff we miss out on, like long-running TV shows, famous old movies, web series, and anime. To fill these gaps in our knowledge, we tend to fall back on hearsay and cultural osmosis. We tend to internalize memes. No, I'm not talking about advice animals. I'm referring to the textbook definition of the word meme, that being the one coined by Richard Dawkins, aka Dick the Birthday Boy. These types of memes are popular ideas which society slowly gestates and passes down across the generations, in a way similar to genetic information. Genes, memes, it's pretty clever stuff. Anyway, the world of anime is pretty full of memes. Some would argue that most of otaku culture across the decades is kind of built on the acquisition, categorization, and internalizing of memes. Some very old, some very new. Now, I'm someone who's generally missed out on a lot of shit for various reasons. There are some pretty huge gaps in my knowledge of, well, everything. So I've had to rely a lot on preconceived notions of things to guide myself through this dark and twisted world. Meet Cutie Honey. She's a perfectly fine example of one of the many things I had zero fucking clue about for most of my life. Really, for years I just assumed Cutie Honey was some kind of magical girl show from the 80s. You know, fighting for love and such, big transformations and monster of the week type stuff. Like, who even made this thing? I don't know, some fucking guy called Go Nagai. Anyway, fast forward a little while, you know, global pandemic, Will Smith slapped Chris Rock, etc., and I come across this. This is Hideaki Anno's 2004 live-action Cutie Honey movie. It was when I saw this that I knew I was missing critical information. Like, first of all, just look at it, and second, why did the Love and Pop guy make a Cutie Honey movie? I know this movie has gained a lot of notoriety in recent years, and having got a glimpse at it, I just had to know, what even is Cutie Honey? In the early 1970s, Toei was looking to create a new magical girl IP to fill the magical girl time slot over at TV Asahi, then known as Nippon Educational Television. One of the companies that pitched the show for this time slot was Dynamic Productions, a little company consisting of little-known manga artist Go Nagai and his brothers, plus some assistants. It was during this initial pitch process that a Toei exec suggested the idea of making a character who could transform into 7 other forms. It was then, and there, that Go Nagai began brainstorming ideas for what would become Honey Idol, a lighthearted rom-com about a magical girl who can transform into different, extremely toyetic versions of herself while fighting crime. Now, this would all be cool and good, but, Dynamic Productions did not get the magical girl time slot. That went to a completely different show that is now probably banished to the darkest depths of the Toei vault. No need to panic, though. When the little smiling cat closes a door, he always opens a window, and Nagai's Honey Idol project would get shifted to a different time slot much later in the day, that being around the same time slot that his other show, Devilman, was on, along with a bunch of other shonen anime and classic tokusatsu. Needless to say, Honey Idol would require a bit of reworking to better fit in. Eventually, Go Nagai did what he does best, and he turned Honey Idol into a much more violent and explosive show about a sexy android who fights evil monsters. A lot of elements from the Idol version would remain, if a bit altered, but the whole thing would be sweetened with that strong Nagai flavor. Along with this TV show, Toei would also commission a manga starring the same character, which, if you're at all familiar with the story behind Devilman's production, this is pretty much the exact same tale. Unfortunately, the manga didn't run for very long. For one, it was pretty controversial for the same reasons a lot of Go Nagai's other work was also controversial. Crude humor, hyper-violence, and extremely pronounced hentai sensibilities. This isn't to say the Cutie Honey comic wasn't beloved, though. This thing was and is legendary, and if you were to ask any older Japanese man or woman, you're likely to hear the name come up. Kids talked about it in hushed tones during recess. A lot of people felt that this thing shouldn't even exist, like they were doing something naughty by reading it. It was taboo. Like I said, this wouldn't be Nagai's first rodeo with parental groups and censors. One of his other famous works, Harenchi Gakuen, Shameless School, faced an even stronger backlash, which we'll talk about later. Nevertheless, Cutie Honey wouldn't run for very long. The anime also wouldn't run for very long, but that isn't to say these things are insignificant. No, the anime especially is very, very famous. Some would even call it the true Cutie Honey. But given that Go Nagai is most famous for his comics, I think it's a good idea to give the manga a look first. Like, why was it so controversial? Well, for starters, there's gonna be a lot of stuff in these comics that I cannot show on YouTube. I'll do my best to work around it, but once we get to Cutie Honey 90, you're pretty much gonna be staring at a black screen, I'm sorry. The original manga is a pretty simple story. Cutie Honey starts with an origin story of sorts, which is, relatively standard. This isn't to say that it's presented in a standard way. No, it's not even the second page turn, and you're already getting shotgun blasted with Honey's bare tits. Setting that and this strange contraption aside for a moment, Honey Kisaragi is an android created by Dr. Kisaragi. Within her body is the Wind Element Solidifier, a machine with the power to manifest shit from thin air, pretty much. I believe its name changes depending on the adaptation. In the movie it's called the Eye System. That's just one of Honey's powers. Her other power is being super fucking hot. No, really, I mean, you're gonna have to use your imagination a little bit since Nagai's art is pretty crude, but Honey is disgustingly beautiful. It is made abundantly clear through every secondary, tertiary, and quaternary character that Honey is literally the most gorgeous being in the fucking universe. Everyone has the hots for her. Her fucking teacher starts groping herself in front of the entire class as soon as Honey merely walks into the room. I'm pretty sure everyone in this classroom would have a giant nosebleed if this manga wasn't literally 50 years old, possibly predating the usage of nosebleeds as an expression of lust. This is St. Chapel High, an all-girls Catholic high school which Dr. Kisaragi enrolled Honey in. It is here that she meets characters like, Professor Alphonse Louis Steinbeck III, and the rather infamous Professor Miharu Tsuneni, also known as, and bear with me here, Histler, which is a portmanteau of, I shit you not, the words hysteria and Hitler. This is because Professor Tsuneni, who is in charge of the girls' dormitories, is an actual sadist who revels in punishing the girls for every contrived rule they happen to accidentally break. No, seriously, the manga goes into pretty extreme detail about her punishments for the girls. But let's move on from now. No, the most important character that Honey meets at St. Chapel is Natsuko Aki / Nat-chan. Natsuko is particularly of note because she's canonically gay for Honey. A genuine, straight-up lesbian, pretty overtly so. It varies a bit depending on which adaptation you look at, but generally speaking, Nat-chan is a big homo. And it's honestly kinda cute. Maybe it's just their funny faces getting to me, but I really like these two. For 1973, this was legitimately transgressive, and I know I just lampshaded a lot of the messier elements in this story, but here's a good place to remind people that transgressiveness really is kind of a neutral, nebulous quality. I feel like nowadays people have gotten a bit too happy with neatly delineating which things are transgressive, parentheses positive, and which things are problematic, parentheses bad, in this really anachronistic way which I really don't fuck with. Really, the kinds of boundary pushing we see in certain pieces of media, especially older ones, can often act as a kind of Rorschach test for the viewer's own psyche. People's collective feelings on this stuff can shift over time. On the one hand, people from the early 70s may have given Go Nagai shit for having gay characters in the first place, but on the other hand, people from the 2020s will definitely give Go Nagai shit for not having good enough gay characters, whatever that means. Oh, and for having a character literally named Hysteria, but that's besides the point. Or is it? That's right, bucko. It is actually bad and cringe to attempt to sanitize these elements and separate them from their anti-establishment, boundary-pushing roots, trying to play censor and decide which transgressive elements get the green light and which get the red light quite literally turns you into the exact kind of reactionary asshole that would go out of their way to censor these comics. You are, by definition, reinforcing the status quo which would repress LGBT media to begin with, just give or take a few decades. You truly cannot have it both ways. I really think you need to actually put on your big boy pants and accept that context matters. Not only are these works from a completely different time in human history, not only are they from a completely different culture, but they were designed to push what the medium could even depict in the first place, which in turn means that hundreds of younger queer/outsider authors now can actually express their thoughts within the medium, free and knowing that they probably won't be hunted down for daring to go against the grain. I'm obviously not entirely crediting Nagai for this. There's tons of other authors that helped expand what the medium could do. He is just one. But, okay, let me level with you. I get it. I know many of these things can be really uncomfortable, and I'm not about to pretend I even like Histler or Alphon to begin with. I'm just trying to make a point here about, actually engaging intellectually with the text you're reading. But if you really genuinely cannot tolerate these teachers or the school setting, worry not. Saint Chapel is actually an extremely minor element of Cutie Honey as a whole. I would even go as far as to say that it's mainly a vestigial element from the aforementioned Harenchi Gakuen. I mean, Cutie Honey does actually reuse previous Go Nagai characters. Danbei comes to mind. So it makes sense that he picked the school setting as a sort of preset for the story. No, fuck the school. The real main conceit of Cutie Honey is Honey Kisaragi's eternal rivalry against Panther Claw, the evil crime organization ran by Sister Jill and the shadowy Panther Zora. Oh, and just in case you were wondering, yes, Sister Jill is also gay for Honey. I think everything relating to Panther Claw is where Cutie Honey feels the most like a classic tokusatsu series. You have a transforming hero who fights a legion of creatures in what are, generally speaking, pretty grounded environments, all within a monsterly weak format. I know this is like Magical Girl 101, but I'm talking within the context of the early 70s, where this specific format wasn't super common in Mahou Shoujo anime. Now, I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but this Panther Claw organization might as well just be called the Shocker. It's got masked goons, it's got fascist vibes, and, of course, the hideous animal-themed bio freaks. Yeah, most of these guys are fucking losers, but I love them. Okay, I do actually really like this spider girl, she's super cute. But yeah, this thing is largely quite simple. Basic even. I think this is felt quite strongly in the original anime, where episodes kind of blend into one another, which does make certain grating elements feel more grating. But the show is largely a good time. It's really adorable. The psychedelic background and animation are a visual treat. Oh, and the fucking music. Now that right there is some certified 70s Kino. I really love how as the show goes on, the pretense of Honey's transformations being careers for young girls to aspire to kind of disappears completely. I mean, I really don't think young Japanese girls are aspiring to become hobos or Charlie Chaplins when they grow up. Oh, honey, I don't think you can do that. While the show does a lot to kind of clean up the original manga's content, it's still very crude when it comes to actual presentation. I mean... It's crude and it's basic, but it's still charming. Even if I wouldn't outright recommend binging it, it's certainly a staple of its era. But I can hear you thinking, surely there's gotta be more to it than that, right? And you'd be correct. It would take 21 years, but Toei would eventually make another Cutie Honey anime, this time in the form of an OVA. Shin Cutie Honey is an 8-episode sequel to the original show, which doubles down on all the darker elements of the story. It's very similar to the aforementioned Cutie Honey 90, the sequel manga, which honestly goes full Devilman. Actually, Cutie Honey 90 is a whole can of worms in and of itself, plagued by a lot of the same bizarre paranoia and political ramblings you see in most 90s Go Nagai manga. It is so bizarre that I would go as far as to call it Penders adjacent in moments. I know, please forgive me, Grandpa, it's true. Regardless, Shin Cutie Honey provides us with the grim 90s comic book version of Cutie Honey we didn't know we wanted. Not only is this thing set in perpetual nighttime, not only are there cyberpunk undertones, but there is honest-to-god Cutie Honey lore in this thing, and it starts to feel downright mythical in a way I wasn't prepared for. Like, the villains here are bordering on D&D characters at certain points. This OVA really emphasizes Honey Kisaragi as the true it girl of her world, the sun around which all other characters orbit. She can do everything, she can be anyone, she is the fulcrum of this world's hope and its endless lust. I'm not that shocked they chose to get mythic with her character. This kind of unkillable Supergirl character naturally lends itself to really surreal and abstract interpretations because she is, at her core, unreal. She is perfect. She is more of a symbol than a realistic three-dimensional character. She has perfect skin, perfect hair, and can completely reinvent herself at the drop of a hat. You can absolutely draw a straight line connecting her to like Bayonetta or whatever. People tend to imply that these types of characters are by definition unlikable, that them being perfect and unrelatable makes you hate them, but I really think people who say that are often kind of projecting their own frustrations about the world into some objective rule that really isn't a thing for me personally. Like with the original show, Shin Cutie Honey is a certified good time. It's got copious Go Nagai references, it's got boob physics, grimdark villains, and all sorts of minxy little outfits for Honey to try on. Oh, and some genuinely kinda tender moments with other cast members. It's cute stuff. The overwhelming grittiness of Shin Cutie Honey would eventually give way to something much different. Honey's next big anime adaptation, Cutie Honey Flash. Flash is pretty different from every other version of Cutie Honey. Airing in 1997, it acted as a reworked version of Cutie Honey that was more aimed at young girls, sorta evoking the Honey Idol days. This anime was basically a slot-in replacement for Sailor Moon, once its 5th and final season finished airing. It even shared a bunch of staff with Sailor Moon. Well, whatever staff was still working at Toei by that point. This thing is way different from what you'd expect given all we discussed before. If I was some jaded asshole, I'd probably say this is like a sanded down version of Cutie Honey. There's a lot of people who are very eager to minimize Cutie Honey Flash because of this, but I won't be doing that here. No, I think Flash is a really fun take on the property. It's really pretty and has tons of charm. I would even argue that some of the edits actually improve the source material. Like, take Histler for example. Comparing her Cutie Honey Flash incarnation to the original is night and day. I much prefer this version. Sure, it's pretty standard, but it's still really comfy. You definitely won't be getting jump scared by whatever zany bullshit the original Cutie Honey liked to pull. But that isn't to say Flash is boring. I'm honestly super burned out on the way people like to shit on quote-unquote typical magical girl shows. Like with Mecha, it feels as if people treat Mahou Shoujo like it's somehow lesser than your run-of-the-mill shonen, and that sucks. It just feels really hypocritical, and it reminds me of the ways in which people love to diminish girly media. I think it's probably quite obvious going off certain things I've said so far, but my experience with magical girl media is pretty limited. Now, whether this was due to lack of access growing up or lack of interest, I'm not super sure. Probably the latter. Let me explain. Growing up, I had a pretty nuanced relationship with what I considered gendered media. Basically, I had a distaste for anything that was either too feminine or too masculine, with some exceptions. So while I did dabble in some superhero comics and movies, I avoided a lot of shonen anime, and while I did watch certain telenovelas, I avoided girl cartoons. Of course, I'll be the first to say that this kind of color-coded gender division is silly and deeply rooted in a lot of bizarre Western ideas that I really don't fuck with. Drawing a line between blue boys media and pink girls media is super didactic, and irritating, but it's generally how the world sees it. As for where I sit now, well, it's similar but different. If you've seen the art and stuff I make, you know I tend to lean very hard into dark, grimy visuals and vibes. I like gothic and romantic stuff that emphasizes strong forms and moods. Going off that description, you'd likely guess that I hate stuff like Cardcaptor Sakura or Sailor Moon or Minky Momo or whatever, but I actually don't. In fact, I love that shit. Yeah, despite my grimy veneer, I have a huge soft spot for pink and colorful things. More so now than ever. This is partially because I'm someone who can get into pretty much anything. I really love craft, so I can make myself appreciate most art by just fixating on the work that goes into it, even if the thing itself isn't for me. That's just one piece of the puzzle, though. The other is that, given my general giddiness and excitability, I tend to get very, very attached to cute things. Call it a motherly instinct or whatever Freudian shit you wanna, but it's genuinely hard for me to make it through a single episode of Sailor Moon without squealing at least once or twice. I love pretty and soft things, especially in art, just as much as I love dark, jagged monsters. It's easy for me to appreciate pretty much anything if I just look at it from the right angle. I bring all of this up because I cannot stand the way in which most people talk about magical girl media. Now, this is vibes-based and all, but I'm referring to the dismissive attitude with which people tend to approach the genre, which I alluded to earlier. This isn't just about mahou shoujo, though. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm talking about the general public's disdain for girl media. It's no secret that being a teenage girl sucks absolute shit. From the delicate balance of performing as your given gender in front of a largely cruel and often predatory world, to the sheer amount of bullshit you're forced to tolerate on the daily because it would be impolite not to do so, and maybe even dangerous. But to top it all off, every day is a struggle to be taken even remotely seriously as a human being with dreams and aspirations. In fact, it goes beyond mere personal offenses and disagreements. It extends to your very place in society and to the media you engage with on a daily basis. You're never taken seriously, you're minimized, dehumanized, and consumed by others. People use you and the things you like as a punching bag, or as a bar to clear in order to prove their moral and intellectual superiority. Anything that's aimed at you specifically is perpetually lampshaded and derided by other people. People who often exert control over you and your life. This extends to the smallest and most inconsequential shit, like, say, TV shows about magical girls. They're stupid, they're gay, and full of tropes. Which is bullshit to me, because literally all media is full of tropes. Tropes are one of the main ways in which we convey information to an audience. I'm not gonna lie and say that shonen media doesn't get picked apart either, but it's rarely with the same level of dismissiveness. Oh, and don't think for a second that you can try to distance yourself from these traditionally feminine things without also being accused of being a pick-me bitch or whatever. It really is a rock and a hard place. I keep running into this frustrating wall when reading about magical girls, which is why I wrote all of this. The wall in question is what I like to call the MADOKA meme, where people are so ready to dismiss an entire genre that when presented with something of that genre they actually like, they will immediately gaslight themselves into thinking it doesn't belong to that genre at all. I don't think I need to spend too much time here explaining the ways in which that show has been contorted into something it really isn't, into some subversive, grimdark story of misery that spits in the face of all that gay Sailor Moon shit, when in reality, MADOKA is actually a very sincere magical girl story. A story which explores a lot of the emotional beats of mahou shoujo as an institution, but at a much quicker pace than a lot of other shows, and with really distinct art direction. Many of the conflicts in MADOKA are already text in dozens of other shows, but you wouldn't know that if you just plug your ears and refuse to engage with any of that stuff. Man, this goes for Eva too. I'm tired of all you little freaks trying to tell me that Eva is some huge subversion of the mecha genre when like 99% of the shit it touches on can also be experienced in like the first 10 episodes of Gundam, or any other Tomino show. Earlier I mentioned something about Cutie Honey's status as a magical girl show being kinda tenuous. And while I honestly think strict genre boundaries are really dumb, I made that point with good reason. Like I said at the very start, Cutie Honey is a shonen. Not just any shonen, but one that really pushes the boundaries of what's even acceptable in children's comics. Well, it used to, back in the day. Things have changed a bit since the 70s. But I actually wouldn't blame you for thinking it wasn't a shonen. Just going off the vibe it gives. It's good to remember that for a lot of people, shonen and shoujo are not demographics as much as they are genres, with very specific tropes and art styles. This is wrong, but it's a common way of thinking among Western audiences, so it would make sense for a non-Cutie Honey understander to initially approach it thinking it's made for little girls. This veneer crumbles the instant you actually read the original manga, of course. But for some people, that veneer crumbled before they even opened the book in the first place. And it was when they laid eyes on a single author's name, Nagai Go. Wait, let me flip it for English audiences. Go Nagai, the man, the myth, the legend. Where do you even fucking start with someone like Go Nagai? Well, if you've ever heard of Devilman, you're already somewhat familiar with his work, but it really stretches far beyond that. There's way too much to ever cover here. If Osamu Tezuka is the father of manga, then Go Nagai is like the crazy uncle of manga. Well, more crazy grandpa these days. He's had his finger in like a quadrillion different pies. Devilman, Mazinger Z, Violence Jack, Cutie Honey, of course, Grandizer, etc. Some of these may seem obscure to you, but that's probably because you're from the United States. For a lot of historical reasons, Nagai's manga never dominated the North American market as much as other places, with the exception of Devilman. He's obviously popular in his country of origin, but beyond that, things like Mazinger Z have a fucking iron grip on most of Latin America. I would know from experience. But Nagai really is a globally beloved figure. He, and by extension Dynamic Productions, were a creative powerhouse during their peak. Go Nagai is a figure so deeply influential to retro manga and anime that it would take less time to list off the things he didn't influence. Like, I don't know, the whims of Mother Nature. Oh geez, the Go Nagai Museum burned down a few months ago. Wait, what's that? One of the few things that survived was a giant statue of Great Mazinger? Well, would you look at that? Maybe this old guy's a little more powerful than we imagined. While it's true that his work is less relevant nowadays, I think the concept of relevancy when discussing authors is not super helpful. We get so distracted talking about what the next big thing from said author could be that we completely forget about the works that already exist. In truth, I don't think authors should be burdened with the expectation of perpetually reinventing themselves. Sometimes, someone's golden age is behind them, and that's okay. Regardless, Nagai's style is instantly recognizable. It's wonky, bordering on expressionist. It's unrestrained, often delirious. It's hyper-violent. It's horny and hilariously juvenile. It's punchy, dynamic, and fast-paced. To him, anatomy and character proportions are a mere polite suggestion, one which he often ignores in pursuit of maximum exaggeration, a surrealist cartooniness that lends many of his illustrations an almost clownish, freakish quality, one which many of his critics are quick to point and laugh at. I'm not entirely sure if these critiques ever got to him, but going off the energy in his works and the kind of vibe the guy puts out, I'm pretty sure his focus was mainly on just letting his mind run rampant. He was fully focused on creating the most transgressive and boundary-pushing, sometimes a little too boundary-pushing, art he could muster, hell-bent on cooking up the craziest, most shocking stories his mind could envision, leaving an impression on audiences, and at that, he succeeded with flying colors. Reading his comics is always a thrill. You never know what you're gonna get. The blend of retro manga aesthetics with modern hyper-violent sensibilities lend Nagai's work a surreal vibe. I often call him the evil Tezuka or evil Shotari Shinomori, and that's not too far from the truth. Besides, his violent creativity goes way beyond the surface level. Nagai's works are often loaded with political undertones and existentialist musings. Most of these are half-baked and often contradictory, especially when you read the stuff he made during the 90s, where the ideas themselves are like a salad of sometimes progressive, oftentimes reactionary worldviews presented with all the grace of an airport shootout, intercut with crudely drawn breasts and a healthy dosage of ADHD. I know this sounds reductive, and it kind of is, but I want to make it clear that I think Go Nagai's art is fucking awesome. I really truly love how crazy it all is. I love championing that type of art in general because I tend to find it super fascinating. Certain types of truly transgressive art can often be unpredictable and fresh in ways nothing else is. Beyond politics, beyond themes, beyond subtext or tropes, I love finding art that is so creatively understrained, so extreme in its convictions, that it gives you a momentary glimpse into an alternate state of mind, an alternate view of reality. This is the shit that gives me life. I don't really care about perceived quality, which will be obvious to anyone who's watched my other videos. I care about the experience of something, so I'm often drawn to outsider art, to auteurs, and to low-quality works, because all the little gaps in their surfaces offer glimpses into the most primal aspects of the art-making process. If you know me, you know that I dabble in pretty much any art discipline I can get my hands on. I make music, I draw, I write, edit, sing, sculpt, program, etc., etc. And I do these things because they offer a visceral, tactile feedback that is just intoxicating. I'm obsessed with ideas and the materializing of said ideas. I'm obsessed with the limitations and shortcuts that one must take when creating, because they tell the story of said creation. I think the end result is but a fraction of what's interesting about the art-making process. So when I see works that, through their flaws, let me almost peer into the story behind their creation and into the impulses of their creators, I get a huge grin on my face. You can probably see how I could turn this entire bit into some hacky essay against the usage of AI, but I think that point is pretty clear. I love human beings. I love the experience of communicating with them through their artistic expressions, and I'm obsessed with the hundreds of rough edges and imperfections that come with those expressions. That is why I love art. This is why, despite his messiness, I really do admire Go Nagai. He is the embodiment of art as unmitigated personal expression. If you spend any amount of time reading interviews with him, it's very clear that beyond gore, beyond horniness, beyond demons and robots, the ultimate goal of his comics was always to create the craziest, most imaginative worlds and scenarios he could dream up, in order to be heard, in order to be remembered. He was a lone artist, raging against the machine, pushing the envelope as far as it would go, not for some laser-focused goal, but because he saw it as his duty to capture the imaginations of as many people as humanly possible, no holes barred. It was the metaphorical throwing of metaphorical spaghetti at the wall, just to see what stuck. And stick it did. His works have influenced dozens, if not hundreds, of individual artists over the decades. I mean, I'd be lying if I said Devilman wasn't one of the things that inspired me to draw in the first place. It specifically has meant so much to me as someone who loves demonic imagery and the concept of heroes who transform and grow to become powerful. And don't get me started on Devilman Lady. For a few months, I sketched, wrote, composed, and partially developed a full retro-style RPG game featuring a cast of demons that were very much inspired by Devilman. I never finished that RPG due to some not great life circumstances that are still ongoing, but maybe I'll revisit it someday. Maybe I'll revisit it through your support. But beyond that, it's pretty obvious that shit like Berserk very heavily borrows from Go Nagai. I may have passingly mentioned this before, but Kentaro Miura is literally the reason I picked up a pen and learned how to do cross-hatching, the reason I even liked dark fantasy to begin with. Berserk is part of my soul. It has influenced so many tiny aspects of my being. It and the struggle of its characters has been a guiding light during some of the worst moments in my life. One could argue that Chainsaw Man is like the modern-day Devilman, not only because it features literal devilmen, but because of the exact kind of juvenile violence and psychological horror it employs. In fact, I'd argue it's a version of Devilman that has learned from the many decades since, a more mature, better crafted Devilman that still hits that specific, edgy, violent tone that attracts people my age. Go Nagai's influence runs very, very deep, and at the risk of stating this fact to the point of absolute viewer exhaustion, I'd like to highlight one particular individual, a somewhat mysterious figure who I alluded to at the very start of this video. It's Anno. It's Hideaki Anno. He's a massive Go Nagai fan, a very vocal one too. I mean, for one, he's openly cited Mazinger Z and Devilman as huge inspirations on Evangelion, with the look of Unit 1 being initially drafted as a Devilman-like figure. From the numerous comparisons to Mazinger that Hideaki Anno himself has drawn, to one of the Eva producers likening the end of Eva to a more serious take on the massacre from Harenchi Gakuen, it's clear that Anno and co just hold an immense reverence for Nagai. And, of course, nowhere is this more clear than in the Cutie Honey movie. While I'm pretty sure this movie did not set the world on fire when it initially debuted, it has gained quite the cult following in recent years. It's a movie people talk about in hushed tones. It's often compared to the Wachowski Speed Racer, and also called the best live-action anime. And I really don't think you need me to tell you that these claims are 100% legit. This thing is fucking cracked. It's not just a movie either, there was also a tie-in manga and a tie-in OVA produced by Gainax, which I'll be talking about later. Cutie Honey the movie was written by Rumi Takahashi and Hideaki Anno, with Anno also directing the whole thing. This is an extremely important detail because in the months leading up to this video, I did the responsible thing and watched every single one of Hideaki Anno's Shin movies, as well as some other films I found really interesting. This includes 2022's Shin Ultraman, which, while not directed by Hideaki Anno, was written by him. This also includes Daikon Films' Return of Ultraman, a 28-minute short which served as Anno's directorial debut. I know this is very much not part of the Shin canon, but like, come on man, just look at this thing. It's just him wearing a windbreaker. I fucking love this guy. I think this old-ass megadork might be my favorite superhero movie director ever. Okay, putting the superhero qualifier is hella lame, but you get what I mean. There's just something so refreshing about the ways in which Anno stays true to the core ideas behind these characters. He tends to lean into the surreal aspects, into the comedy, and into the anime-like violence, while also remaining fairly sincere in regards to subtext. Yeah, these films can be kind of messy in places, and that's no doubt in part to Anno being kind of a pain to work with, but I promise you, it's surprisingly easy to look past those shortcomings and really love these movies. Hell, part of the reason I love them so much is because of the occasional rough moments. I certainly think you need a certain amount of literacy in the history of tokusatsu and Anno's personal career to really truly appreciate these movies, but even if you don't, Cutie Honey is a fucking blast. Not just because it's the best live-action anime, but because it's just a disgustingly good movie. This thing has no right being assembled as well and as competently as it is, but it is. And it's a triumph of not only mixed media filmmaking, but tokusatsu as a whole. I debated for a while how to write this section. I don't really want to spend too much time telling you how well-paced this movie is, telling you how fun the dialogue is, how cute the protagonist is. No, you should just watch it and see what the hype is all about. Instead of that, I'd rather focus on a few specific elements, mainly the abstract reality of the movie. You see, Cutie Honey 04 doesn't concern itself with being realistic or believable. It recognizes the cartoony parts of the source material and really understands their symbolic importance, so to speak. Then it laser focuses on materializing them on screen with a very impressionist approach that blends anime sensibilities with tokusatsu vibes and the director's own past as an independent animator. The result is a movie that by every definition should be some variety of visual vomit. Yet, it works fucking perfectly. And I really think this might be my favorite approach for this kind of stuff. 2004 was a very different time for a picture like this. It was an era before comic book movies were standardized like they are nowadays. So instead of hiring 100 overworked and underpaid VFX artists to crunch on this thing and later be laid off, Cutie Honey goes for a much, much lower budget approach. I think Americans tend to assume you simply can't make a movie like this on a limited budget or with a lower production standard, but That's simply not true. And in fact, I think this movie's plasticky, collage-like feel makes it infinitely more dynamic and explosive than nearly every other comic book movie in the market. And that's because it successfully conveys the idea of its world and its characters without getting bogged down in excruciating details, making the entirety of Cutie Honey feel super agile. Like, there is zero slack in this thing, it's a fucking breeze. Hideaki Anno's Cutie Honey, the movie, the game, possesses a metric truckload of guts and creative gumption. Not only does it speak for itself, but it fully commits to a fantastical, abstract, anime-like reality which complements the source material beautifully. Not only is it awesome in isolation, but it speaks to certain creative tendencies which would go on to flower in Anno's later works. Take Shin Kamen Rider, for example, a movie that is like Cutie Honey but which stems from an even more primal emotional space and explores very different moods. Like with Cutie Honey, it fully commits to the premise of its setting, OG Kamen Rider in this case. It borrows from both the original 1971 TV show and the original Shotaro Ishinomori manga, which acted as the source material for the character, blending both with a distinct Evangelion flavoring that creates a really cool and uniquely Hideaki Anno world. It uses this world to go as batshit insane as it can in the span of 2 hours, in what is one of the most creatively unrestrained and almost shamefully sincere movies I have ever seen. It provides you with both the ridiculous tokusatsu action of Kamen Rider as well as a deeply heartfelt movie about what these characters and these concepts mean to the artists behind the movie, and by extension, an entire generation of otaku. And I know I called it shamefully sincere, but I want to make it 100% clear that I do not think this movie is embarrassing. I think it's a fucking masterpiece, but I'm also very aware of the sheer tonal whiplash that is often on display here, a quality which many people have genuinely bounced off of. But fuck, man, this just means so much to me. I love how fucking messy this thing is in general. It takes balls to make a movie that is this sappy and heartfelt about a grasshopper man who fights Nazis. I respect the fuck out of it, because of its strong authorial voice. It really feels like human beings made this thing, not a corporation. I love these really empty-looking dialogue scenes. I love the occasionally very crude digital photography on display. I love the blocking and framing that pays homage to the bizarre camera work of the original show. I love the grimy, hyper-violent combat scenes that evoke fan films more often than not. Like, there's nothing more DIY than a bunch of guys in rubber suits running around a forest, shot on what feels like a fucking iPhone camera. This movie will sink so deep into vast pits of sadness and despair, only to immediately pop back up with the goofiest and most exhilarating action ever, plus a soundtrack which has no right going as fucking hard as it does. So the end result is a movie that makes you really feel for these characters and the ideas they represent. Shin Kamen Rider is super interested in doing justice by these characters and showing why their archetypical elements are still relevant to a modern audience. It breathes so much life into Kamen Rider as a whole. It's fucking awesome. And all of this was already there in Cutie Honey. Admittedly, Cutie Honey is aiming to be less depressing than Shin Kamen Rider, but it still has many of the same undertones. Hell, it even pulls a lot from Eva in ways I find really fascinating. As a whole, these movies are unshackled. They have more in common with exploitation cinema than with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Despite their insane levels of artifice, they end up feeling way more real to me, and that's because believability was never really that important in the first place. In a way, I'm kinda reminded of Twin Peaks here. More specifically, Twin Peaks: The Return. I think it's in the way that it also uses very crude and abstract imagery to convey ideas to you. In the case of Twin Peaks, a lot of the VFX work is legitimately stripped down to the bone. Cutie Honey isn't quite like that, but they're similar in the sense that both works look extremely fake, which is something Twin Peaks got a ton of criticism for, but for me, it's one of its more appealing elements. Like with Cutie Honey and to a lesser degree Kamen Rider, Twin Peaks: The Return looks kinda wonky, but in a way that makes it feel more dynamic and agile. It isn't trying to dazzle you or make you think that these things are literally happening in real life. It's giving you an impressionist collage-like glimpse at its deeper concepts. This isn't a rigid, believable fictional world, it's a bunch of ideas and feelings. It respects you enough to assume you will buy into the fiction, even if it isn't outright believable. A lot of this applies equally to filmmakers like Nobuhiko Obayashi, most famous for his 1977 movie House, which you need only watch like 5 minutes of to understand my point. But this goes way beyond House. No, really, this dude has an extensive body of work which very often deliberately abstracts itself to hint at deeper emotions. Like 1983's The Girl Who Conquered Time, which, despite having a fairly simple plot, is put together in a way that slowly comes apart at the seams and feels trippy in a melancholic way. That, or 1986's His Motorbike, Her Island, which is a blend of pure color and pure black and white photography, which is as melancholic as it is surreal, using a lot of visual trickery to sell a dreamlike feeling that's downright fucking gorgeous. In reality, filmmaking, like with any other artistic medium, is about solving problems. How do you convey something to an audience without literally spelling it out for them? Convey it visually and in emotionally resonant ways. There's a nearly infinite amount of solutions depending on the problem and the audience in question, so acting like a movie is bad just because it happens to look like this is pretty cringe to me, especially when it fully succeeds at the problem it's trying to solve. I think Hideaki Anno's 2004 live-action adaptation of Go Nagai's 1973 shonen manga Cutie Honey is pretty good. And when I say pretty good, I mean that it inspired this entire video. Whether you consider the existence of this video good or bad, well, who's to say? Nevertheless, Anno's Cutie Honey really drills down to the core of the character. It takes a lot of these very basic initial concepts and puts them through a hyperbolic time chamber that recontextualizes them in all the excess and gaudiness of the early aughts. This also goes for Cutie Honey, the OVA made around the same time. While I really don't have much time to talk about it, it does a lot of what I said, but in the context of animation, and it's equally good when it comes to the characters and their chemistry. Really, both of these legit sold me on the extended cast, from Seiji to Natchan to Honey herself. It's super cute. But who is Cutie Honey, I hear you ask? Cutie Honey is a perfectly beautiful, indestructible bombshell of a heroine. Cutie Honey is a barrage of colors that holds no relation to the material world in a way that goes beyond just being a mere hot girl and starts to become more of a texture and a concept than a concrete person. Cutie Honey is the beautiful fighting girl, the embodiment of an idea that has grown to absolutely dominate large portions of popular culture. Cutie Honey is kitsch. She is the incarnation of passionate, sophomoric sexual impulses. She is hyperviolence. She is cuteness. She is strength. She is always changing. Or, as Japanese psychologist and critic Tamaki Saito puts it, the image of the beautiful fighting girl contains every conceivable sexual perversion. It is easy to identify traces in it of homosexuality, the girl with the phallus, pedophilia, sadism, masochism, and fetishism. It is very nearly an image of polymorphous perversion itself. Much like fans of yaoi, otaku cannot resist the temptation to fiddle with fictional sexuality, reversing, recombining, and otherwise reshaping it into endless variations. In this sense, the beautiful fighting girl is a remarkable invention of otaku privilege. Her universality as an icon is a demonstrable fact. She has propagated herself all over the world through the internet, and the seeds of a new generation are sprouting everywhere. Sure, man. I still don't know what that thing about the girl with the phallus was, but you do you. Anyway, hopefully that large academic citation will be enough to distract people from the fact that I completely neglected mentioning Cutie Honey Universe, or Cutie Honey the Live, which is just absolute dog shit.